$15 trillion. That's the amount of money estimated to have been spent by central banks and governments around the world to help stimulate economies during the COVID-19 coronavirus and since. That $15 trillion has been created out of thin air using a process called quantitative easing or money printing. And in this video, I'm going to tell you more about exactly what quantitative easing is, how it works, and the 3 things you can do to help protect your wealth against the adverse implications of it. So here goes. So what is quantitative easing? So quantitative easing, or QE as it's known, is a mechanism used by central banks to help print new money that can ultimately be put into an economy to help stimulate growth during periods where there's risks to an economy and its growth or sluggish performance. And the idea being that the more money there is circulating in an economy, it creates demand for that money and causes businesses, people and institutions to spend more and invest more. So now that you know what quantitative easing is, well, how exactly does it work? Well, it's a fairly simple concept. You have central banks like the Federal Reserve in the United States, the Bank of England in England, and the European Central Bank in Europe, for example, on one side, and then you have the commercial lending banks on the other side that lend to businesses, individuals like you and me, and other institutions. And what the central banks do during QE is they create money effectively out of thin air through an entry in a system, in a computer system, and they use that newly created money to buy government bonds that are held by those commercial banks on the other side. So by buying in return, they take the bonds out of the system and put money into the system. And that new money that is sitting with those commercial lending banks can now be lent out through the real economy to businesses, to people, etc., thus stimulating demand and creating economic growth, hopefully. Now, provided interest rates are low, there should be good demand for that new money from people, businesses, and other institutions. But there is a couple of implications of quantitative easing. The first one, which we're experiencing now, is inflation. Too much money in a system chasing the same or fewer goods and services causes those goods and services, the prices of those, to go up, which is exactly what's happening. There's more money, people have hands on more money, and they're able to buy only a similar amount of things. Supply and demand causes the price to rise. The second implication is that new money that's being created, it may not be going to goods and services, but it may be going to assets to be bought. For example, stocks, real estate, and other types of assets. And again, the same amount of assets being chased by more money causes those asset prices to rise, which is why you see property prices rising quickly, stock markets going up and rallying, and other assets as well. And the risk of that is a potential asset bubble. So now you know what QE is and how it works. I'm going to give you 3 ways that you can protect your wealth against the adverse implications of it. So here goes. Number 1, invest in hard assets that fare well during periods of high inflation caused by QE. So, for example, investing in real estate, investing in infrastructure or precious metal like gold, all of these assets tend to be good hedges against inflation that may have been caused by excess quantitative easing. And by investing in these assets, you do protect yourself against some of the inflation rise effects that you may be seeing, because those assets also go up as well. So there's a counterbalance effect. So number 2, focus on investing in income generating assets. So these are assets like rental property, where you're collecting rent for use of property. It could be bonds where you're being paid interest in return for investing in those bonds. and so on and so forth. Now, what's good about these types of assets is that you're getting paid an income irrespective of the state of the economy. And when inflation is increasing, you really want to be in assets that are paying you income, because that income can help shield you against some of the effects of QE. So tip number 3, keep some cash on hand. Now, in tough economic environments such as these, it's really important that you maintain liquidity and have access to things like cash and cash type instruments, because they will protect you in case the value of your investments go down. Now, as a rule of thumb, you typically want to be keeping anywhere between 3 and 6 months of your operating expenses as cash on hand. So for example, if you spend $2,000 a month on things like rent, your bills, food, travel, etc., then 3 months worth will be 3 months times the 2,000, which is approximately $6,000 of cash on hand in your bank account. You can stretch that up to 6 months, and that would be 2,000 times 6, so $12,000 there. So anywhere between $6,000 and $12,000 if your operating expenses were around $2,000. Now, obviously, if your operating expenses are higher, you want to be having a bigger cash buffer to be able to protect you during those times. And so there you have it, a brief overview of quantitative easing. Now, in my opinion, it really has been a failed $15 trillion experiment by central banks and governments around the world. But unfortunately, those are things that we cannot control. And what you can control is the things that you can do in response to that. So hopefully my 3 tips were helpful. Now, if you like this video, please do subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on the very next video.